So my name is Phoebe. I used to live in Shettleston. I now live in Moodiesburn, and my gran lived in Parkhead, and I'm retired.
How much do you remember about your grand's place in Parkhead?
Quite a lot, really.
Tell us
She
about it.
lived in Dunbar Street, which I believe used to be Dawson Street. I'm not 100% sure of that. It's where the Forge now is, the Forge Market now is. The street had gas lighting in it, I remember that. And I used to watch she was 2 stairs up, and I used to watch the lamp lighters coming to light the lamps. So she was there until I was about 10 or 11. I don't think I was at secondary school. I think I was still getting a bit confused with my granddad dying and her dying, but no, my granddad was first. So she would be there until I was about 13, 14, so that was early 60s.
And this was a tenement building?
Tenement building, yes.
Common
3
stair, all that
stories,
kind of
3
thing,
stories, outside toilet on the stair, on the landing, and just a room and kitchen, and that was it. So, so I have quite a lot of memories. There was a back court, just a yard type back court, no grass or plants or anything. But I used to go out to play with some of the other children in the street from time to time as well. And it was just round from Parkhead Cross. Just so it was.
And what did your mum and dad do for work?
My dad was a motor mechanic with the GPO. He worked near the Barrows. I've forgotten, Barrowfield Street. I've forgotten the name of the street now, just across from the Barrows anyway. He worked there for many years and then moved to Finniston, still with the GPO. My mum at that time didn't work, of course.
Moving up the hill.
Yeah. Well, we were in Shettleston,
And
then when I got married, by the time I got married, we were in Carntyne, South Carntyne. But so it was up the hill from Parkhead, yes.
Yeah. But all those streets you're describing around what, as you say, is now the Forge shopping centre, but in those days must have been the Forge. Beardmore's.
The Forge was just down the road from it, out onto Duke Street and turn left, yes, and the white gates. That was the Forge, and my mum had 2 brothers that worked in the Forge, and my dad had a sister who worked in the Forge as a crane driver during the war as well. But I don't know an awful lot of details. I think my granddad worked there as well. I think by the time he was still working, I can remember sitting on his knee, and he always had a thruppenny bits in his waistcoat pocket for me. But he retired, and then it must have been dementia as he got older, and he died.
But it was such a huge enterprise. It must have dominated the local district.
I'm not really aware of that, I must admit. I just know it was there. I actually have things at home, artefacts, I suppose you could call them, from the Forge. When I was a student teacher, I wrote to Beardmore's and asked if they could have anything I could use as teaching material. So I have quite a few pamphlets, advertising pamphlets, booklets, and samples of steel as well in my loft. So they'll go to the auction someday with a bit of luck and be worth a fortune. Probably not.
No, well, that's fantastic, because everything, I've seen photographs and I've seen, film and so on. It just feels as if it was this absolutely central enterprise to the whole area, because so many people, thousands of people worked there, didn't they? And no doubt people talked about it. No doubt people, their social lives, their family lives were all connected.
Yes, it must have been, but being so young, I wasn't really aware of that, just knew that family worked in it. And you would see the people going about with their overalls on, and there probably was a hooter at the end of the day as well. Don't really remember that, but I'm sure there would be.
There probably was, and closing down the boilers to the Glasgow Fair and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, these kind of things,
I think the rhythm of life must have been dominated by, that wasn't the only place, obviously, all over Bridgeton, Dalmarnock and Parkhead and so on were.
Loads of places,
Loads of, you were very aware of that as a kind of...
there's always just been things, places, works, you know, it was the work, and it's that hooter, or it's that hooter. And when we moved, we were in, as I say, we were in Shettleston, just at the one end of Westmuir Street. So my gran, who was 96 when she died, when I would be about 13, 14, but my mum walked every day to Parkhead to my gran's, because of course there was no caring in those days. Nobody came in to look after people, and she was bedbound in the end, and it was a big high bed as well, in a bed recess. And she was just granny. She was always just there, and my mum went every day, and she cooked and she cleaned and she washed and all the things that you have to do. Every now and again she would my mum would go to, I think it was Ferguson's at the Cross, which was a licensed grocer's, and she'd get a gill of whiskey for my gran. And of course it got filled up. You didn't buy the gill bottle, it got filled up from a barrel. Kind of remember that, but I wasn't allowed near that. I had to stand at the door.
Not.
Yeah, I had to stay at the door.
Yeah, interesting. And so Shettleston, was it all part? Did it feel like just kind of one long line of industrial kind of works and so on, from the Carlton out through Denniston, Bridgeton, Shettleston, and so on, or were they distinct?
They were quite distinct, I think, because at the Gushets, where the roads met, Westmuir Street, Murifall Drive, Shettleston Road, Old Shettleston Road, where they met was, I would say, was a kind of exit point from one to the other. Old Shettleston Road, as it came back towards Duke Street, that was all Beardmores up to there. Whether that was for rolling stock or what, or milling, I don't know. But I do remember that. But I think there's a distinct breaking point at that point. There was always a policeman on points duty there as well. And going up, we always walked up Westmuir Street, and it was mainly tenements with some shops, not an awful lot of shops, you know, sporadic. There was a good chip shop and a few grocers, and there was Barney's Rag Store at the corner of Carolina Street, I think, and Westmuir Street. And then as you came nearer the cross, there was more shops, more or less, at the cross. And the schools, there was a school there as well. And it's like a reversal in time, because the school at that point, when I was still at school, they opened during the summer holidays for children to go in and have their dinner, to go and have their lunch for a meal. And of course now schools are doing breakfast, and it happens at lunchtime as well, I think, nowadays for some kids.
And in the holidays too, I think that's right.
Yeah,
interesting. So that's gone full circle, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So where did you go to school yourself?
I went to Shettleston Primary, which was in Old Shettleston Road at that point. And again, walking down to school, of course you walked every day to school. It wasn't that far, but I do remember there was one house that we passed in the bottom of a tenement, and they still had gas lights in the house. So that's the only one I'd seen in the area. Place we used to go to in Rothsay for holidays, it had gas lighting. So it's interesting remembering these things and just thinking of the differences and how far we've advanced.
It's just, as I get older, all those things seem, less far away. Somebody said to me, somebody said the other day, talking about 30 years ago, I thought they were talking about the 1970s,
It's frightening when you get told the dates. God. Yes, it is.
And then on to secondary?
Secondary, well, I actually went in school. I was quite good. I was good in primary school. There was three of us sort of between us. And one day the headmaster, I think, came in and said that they had applications for the girls' high school and various other schools, girls' high school and the one that used to be in the boys' school that was in Cathedral Street, Alan Glenn's.
Oh.
Alan Glenn's. And he said they're here. So I went home and I told my mum, and I mean they must have scribbled. I think it was. I used to take. We had to pay every term, and there was an interview to get into the school. And I remember going to the interview, and you saw the headmistress first of all, and that was Miss Baxter, and you got wee tests while she was talking to my mum. and it was 0.1 times 0.1. I remember that one, you know, that's always a tricky one. And then there was a test with another teacher in a room that sat 4 pupils. It was an old building in Garnet Hill, and we did a proper written exam thing there. And I remember coming home and saying to my mum and dad, the lady had spats on. So she had white gaiters, she was wearing white gaiters and her big gown, of course, you know, so I said, she had spats on it. I'd be gaiters, you know. So.
Tremendous. So you were whisked away to higher things.
Yeah, well, it wasn't, I mean, it was day school, it wasn't.
Sure.
I think it was £6, 3 8. That seems to ring in my mind. 3 and 8 pence per term.
Per term.
And I took the cash into school to pay for it.
How did you get to and from school? Do you on the train?
Bus or the tram? The tram at first, and then the bus. And on gym days, we went from Garnet Hill. We walked down the back to Cowcaddens, got the tram or the bus along to Kirklee, and then we had to walk from there to the playing fields to practice hockey.
School uniform?
School uniform, yes.
Did you get any pelters when you came home wearing your school uniform back to Shettleston?
No, and we had to wear a hat as well.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. No, there was nothing actually. The one thing I did balk at was the hat, because it was a felt hat. And it was quite a bit like a kind of bowlerish hat. Not quite a bowler hat, but felt like and fairly stiff. And I refused to wear that. So I got a gabardine hat, a soft gabardine hat. And of course, when you were wearing it, you tucked it at the back so that it sat back. You see, you tucked it in. But I've always liked wearing hats, so it didn't really worry me.
I feel I've walked into the prime of Miss Jean Brody here.
Yeah, it is a bit, yeah. And cloakrooms, of course, in school were open, and there was our wee crowd, there was about 6 of us. We always went down to the cloakroom at lunchtime and we blethered and, you know, the things you do. And we did somersaults over the pegs and things like that. But of course, that's not allowed now. Everything's locked, isn't it? Yeah.
So it's interesting. So now you've moved out to Moodiesburn, sort of effectively in the countryside, really, to the north of the city. How do you look back on the East End now? I mean, here you are. You obviously still come here. What are your sort of feelings about it now?
I feel sometimes, especially Shettleston, which of course was where I started as such, you know, they're always talking about the East End and how deprived it is and things. I mean, there was a street then that we were told not to go to because there were a lot of not nice people in it. You know, a lot of people in that street went to jail. There was a lot of gang fights in that street and it involved knives, of course. So we always kept clear of it. But sometimes I feel, was I deprived? You know, certainly not aware of it. And certainly my mum and dad's, I had an older brother. They looked after me and they must have scrimped to pay for, you know, my education at that time as well. I'm quite surprised at times, and when I do drive along, I think, there's been a lot of good things, but then again, every place has its bad areas as well, doesn't it?
Yes, I don't know. It does sometimes feel as it's been neglected a bit. Possibly, yeah. Yeah, possibly. I mean, there are new things, particularly around here, down towards the river. So Shettleston, you wouldn't really have been aware of the river in Shettleston, would you? Wouldn't have been a... Well, yes, we used to walk from Shettleston Road, at the one end of Welshett Road, across through the Sandy Hills golf course, through Carmyle and down to the Clyde. Oh, did you? And we used to do that on a reasonably regular basis. And what did you do when you got there? Just walked along the Clyde, and that's it. And sort of, probably by the time we got there, it was time to come back. It's a wee way, yeah. But again, walking has always been a thing. It's not been a bonus, you know, an onus, in that we did that as children because my dad, being a mechanic, he always had a car. I remember a motorbike sidecar, in fact, we had first of all. And my brother was on the pillion and my mum was in the back of the sidecar and I was in the front. It was a kind of bullet-shaped... Four-seater? Sidecar, four-seater, wow. Yes. And we did go holidays in it, but I don't know when that changed to a car. It was a big old Austin 10 or something like that, you know. No heating, of course. I'm really struck even today by how when you get down to the river, you know, I mean, once you get past, once you get past Dalmarnock, it's tremendously rural. It's like kind of, you know, and yet if you were to walk, you know, 100 yards either side away from the towpath, it's not really a towpath, but you know what I mean. You're back in the city. It's curious that sort of.
It is, yeah. And listening to the story and the things I'm hearing about, you know, I thought I must try and find my way down there. You know, and my son and his girlfriend, they have found lots of places to walk their wee dog, and I said I must say to him, and he'll find it. You know.
Well, I've done it as far. I've done the whole path as far as the end of Strathclyde Country Park, whatever it's called, Motherwell. There's bits you have to go over you have to leave the river and go over that big motorway intersection.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
Whatever it's called. But yeah, some of it's very nice. Bothwell.
Yeah, he goes to Boswell quite a lot.
Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, good. Well, I think that's excellent. Thank you very much